Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive with us. Today, um, today we are going to be looking into the world of targeted individuals.
Yeah,
Have you heard of this?
I have.
These are people who believe they're being harassed,
Mm-hmm.
not in the usual way,
Right.
but electronically.
It's definitely a phenomenon that I think really captures the anxieties of our digital age.
Right.
We're surrounded by all this technology, a lot of which we don't really understand,
Yeah.
and it can be invisible. So it's not surprising, I think, that some people might feel a sense of unease or maybe even paranoia about how all of this technology that we don't really understand could be used against them.
Absolutely. And that's what we are exploring today through the story of Richie from Boston.
Okay.
He is a YouTube creator, and he claims to have experienced this electronic harassment firsthand.
Interesting.
And he's got this whole video where he details his experiences, the technology he believes is being used, and even offers some solutions.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about Richie's story is that he seems at first pretty reluctant to even talk about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he felt like by even acknowledging the harassment, he would somehow be validating his harassers.
Oh, like giving them the satisfaction?
Exactly.
Wow.
It's a sentiment that you hear a lot from people who identify as targeted individuals.
Oh.
This fear of somehow legitimizing their tormentors by even talking about it.
He eventually did open up, though.
He did.
And what he describes is pretty intense.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine waking up in the middle of the night
Okay.
and your body is vibrating
Oh.
and you feel this intense heat on your skin.
Oh, wow.
Like someone is holding a magnifying glass under the sun, but there's no one there.
Yeah.
He also talks about constant sleep disturbances and this overwhelming sense of fear.
These symptoms, while definitely unsettling, could be attributed to, a variety of things, stress, anxiety, even medical conditions. But for Richie, they are very clear signs of something much more sinister, something that he calls electronic harassment.
And it's not just him.
Right.
He mentions a friend, Erin Elizabeth, who claims to have had her phone hacked
Okay.
and that the hacker was like making threats through the device.
Oh, wow. So how does Richie define electronic harassment?
He describes it as the use of unseen forces or technologies to deliberately manipulate and torment individuals.
Interesting.
Like the idea that someone somewhere has the ability to directly impact his physical and mental state through these means.
Okay.
What kind of technologies are we talking about here? Because this all sounds pretty sci-fi.
Well, Richie uses some terms that might sound familiar from conspiracy theories, things like ELF,
Okay.
which stands for extremely low frequencies.
Right.
And then there are Gwen towers.
What are those?
Those are short for Ground Wave Emergency Network.
Interesting.
These are real things. They are a network of high-frequency radio transmittals, and they were originally designed for military communication.
Oh, wow.
He also points to the more ubiquitous cell phone towers, suggesting that they could be used for a lot more than just relaying phone calls.
I'm starting to see how this connects back to those digital anxieties we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
We rely on these technologies every single day,
We do.
but most of us have no idea how they work.
Exactly.
And so
That's why.
it creates a sense of vulnerability.
Right.
This feeling that we're at the mercy of forces that we can't see or control.
Exactly. And Richie kind of takes it a step further.
Really?
Yeah. He links electronic harassment to the rise of other kind of unexplained phenomena like sleep paralysis,
Oh, okay.
which he says, wasn't really a thing back when he was younger.
Interesting.
And he believes the sudden, increase in reported cases of sleep paralysis is evidence that something is being done to people, and they're just kind of misinterpreting it as this medical condition.
So you're saying that the military or some shadowy group is beaming these frequencies at people.
Yeah.
And instead of recognizing it as electronic harassment, they think they're having a sleep paralysis episode.
That's his theory.
Wow.
Yeah, and he makes a similar argument for the rise of adult allergies,
Oh, right.
suggesting that they're not real allergies,
Whoa.
but rather reactions to things like genetically modified food, polluted water, heavy metals in the air.
Wow.
So basically, he sees all of these widespread health concerns as evidence of a larger coordinated attack on the population.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is.
Why Richie, though? Why would he be targeted? Does he have any theories about that?
Well, this is where his deep dive into conspiracy theories comes into play.
Okay.
He believes he's being targeted because he's a truth seeker.
Oh, okay.
Someone who's willing to speak out about sensitive topics and challenge the official narrative.
Well, he does mention covering a lot of potentially controversial subjects on his YouTube channel.
Right.
So I guess he believes he got too close to something someone didn't want him to uncover.
Right. And he even talks about other content creators who have, suddenly disappeared from the internet,
Really?
suggesting that they were also silenced for their investigations.
Wow.
Which, creates a sense of fear and paranoia, this idea that there's this powerful force out there trying to suppress the truth.
This is starting to feel like a real-life thriller.
It is.
It's easy to see how someone like Richie, who's already inclined towards these conspiracy theories, could really connect the dots in this way.
Right.
And genuinely believe he's under attack.
Yeah, and the thing is, these beliefs can have very real consequences.
Oh, yeah.
Richie even shares an anecdote about being driven from his own home by the intensity of this perceived harassment.
Wait, seriously, tell me more about that.
He describes feeling like there was an earthquake happening in his house,
Right.
so strong that he ran outside,
Wow.
expecting to see all of his neighbors out there too.
Yeah.
But when he got outside, he was the only one who felt it. And he was so disturbed by this that he ended up at his partner's house in the middle of the night.
Oh, my God.
He was terrified to even stay in his own home.
That's pretty scary, regardless of whether the harassment was real or imagined.
It is.
You can see how deeply these beliefs affect people's lives.
Absolutely. Whether or not the harassment is objectively real, the fear and anxiety that it generates are very real and can have a significant impact on a person's life.
So if Richie believes he's under this kind of attack, what does he propose as a solution?
Well, this is where his proposed solution takes a bit of an unexpected turn.
Oh, really?
He suggests embracing religion and the full armor of God as protection against electronic harassment.
Hold on, he's saying that faith is the answer to high-tech weaponry.
Ah.
How does that even work?
He draws a parallel between calling on the name of Jesus to stop sleep paralysis, which is something that he claims to have experienced himself,
Okay.
and using faith to combat electronic harassment. He even goes so far as to say that demons and everything else travel through electricity,
Whoa.
implying that religious protection can somehow disrupt these attacks.
So he's basically saying that prayer and faith are more powerful than these alleged electronic weapons.
That seems to be his belief.
Wow.
Yeah, he encourages people to pray to ask for God's protection, and he genuinely believes that this is what helped him cope with the harassment he was experiencing.
It's a fascinating example of how people try to make sense of experiences that feel beyond their control,
Right.
and merging their understanding of the world with their belief systems.
Absolutely. And it also highlights an important point about these targeted individual communities.
Okay.
They often attract people from a really diverse range of backgrounds with all sorts of different beliefs and explanations for why they believe they're being targeted.
Right.
But what unites them is this shared sense of fear and the desire to find answers,
Yeah.
even if those answers seem a little unconventional.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where Richie's story, I think, gets even more interesting, because he doesn't shy away from criticizing other content creators in the TI community.
Oh, really? What does he say about them?
He accuses them of profiting from fear and not offering any real solutions.
Whoa.
He seems to view his approach, this emphasis on faith and the full armor of God,
Okay.
as a more genuine and effective way to deal with this issue.
So even within this community of people who share this belief in electronic harassment, there's this tension between those who are genuinely trying to help and those who might be exploiting a vulnerable population.
Exactly. And that's something I think that's really important for our listener to keep in mind as we delve deeper into this world of targeted individuals. Yeah. There's a lot of information out there.
There is.
And it's so crucial to approach it with a critical eye, to be able to discern between genuine attempts to understand this phenomenon and those who might be taking advantage of people's fears.
Absolutely.
It's interesting how Richie seems to be both a believer in this electronic harassment and kind of a skeptic when it comes to other people in the TI community. He even mentions like seeing these videos of other TIs who look like raving lunatics.
Right.
And while he doesn't endorse that kind of behavior, he does seem to understand where it's coming from.
I think that's a really important point you make, because Rishi's perspective, reminds us that these beliefs, whether we agree with them or not, can really have a profound impact on a person's mental and emotional state.
Right.
It's not just about whether the harassment is objectively real, but how these beliefs can shape a person's experience of the world.
What if we took a step back from the specifics of Richie's story and looked at this whole targeted individual phenomenon from a broader perspective? What can we learn about ourselves and the world we live in?
I think that's a really valuable exercise, because if we zoom out a bit,
Okay.
we see that Richie's story isn't an isolated incident. there's a whole online community of people who identify as TIs.
Yeah.
And they share their experiences and theories about, who's behind these attacks and why they're being targeted.
And their explanations vary widely, right? I've heard some people blaming the government,
Mm-hmm.
others pointing to shadowy organizations,
Right.
and some even attributing it to, like, supernatural forces.
Exactly. Some believe they're being targeted for their political beliefs, others for their activism, and some just for being awake to the truth about the world, whatever they believe that truth to be.
Right.
And what's really striking, I think, is the diversity of these communities.
Yeah.
You have individuals from all walks of life with different backgrounds and belief systems, but they're all united by this shared experience of perceived persecution.
It's a complex landscape, and while it's easy to dismiss these beliefs as just paranoia or delusion, I think there's something to be said for trying to understand where these fears are coming from.
I agree with that. We are living in a world of increasing technological complexity where information spreads so rapidly. Yeah.
And it's really easy to feel a loss of control over our own lives and narratives.
All right. And these TI communities, regardless of whether or not the claims are objectively true, they do offer a sense of validation and belonging and support.
Yeah.
For individuals who feel isolated and misunderstood.
It's that double-edged sword of online communities, right?
Right.
They can be so helpful
Yes.
for connecting people who share common experiences.
Yes.
But they can also make it so much harder to step back and critically evaluate your own beliefs.
Exactly. And that's where I think the skepticism surrounding TI claims comes into play.
Right.
It's important to acknowledge that these experiences are often very difficult to prove or disprove.
Right.
There's a real lack of concrete evidence.
Yeah.
And the symptoms that are described, like the ones that Richie mentioned,
Yeah.
they can often be attributed to other more mundane causes like stress anxiety
Right.
or even mental health conditions.
It's a tricky situation.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to dismiss someone's experiences outright, especially when they're genuinely suffering.
Right.
But at the same time, it's crucial to approach these claims with healthy skepticism,
Yeah.
especially when they involve extraordinary claims about government conspiracies or advanced technology.
And this is really, I think, where the need for empathy and critical thinking really intersect.
Yeah.
Because we can acknowledge the very real fear and distress that individuals who believe they're targeted are experiencing without necessarily endorsing their explanations for those experiences.
Sure.
It's about finding that balance between compassion and critical evaluation.
It reminds me of how Richie talks about understanding why some TIs might look like raving lunatics,
Yeah.
given what they believe they're going through.
Mhm.
Like, he seems to get it,
He does.
even if he doesn't agree with it.
Yes, and that's an important insight.
Yeah.
He's acknowledging that these beliefs, whether true or not, can have a profound impact on a person's mental and emotional state.
Yeah.
And I think it just underscores the need for a nuanced approach to this topic.
Right.
One that, avoids simplistic dismissals,
Right.
but also encourages critical thinking and responsible information sharing.
It's like that saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you,
Right.
even if you don't buy into the specifics of electronic harassment. I think the underlying fears about surveillance and manipulation and the misuse of technology are very real and relevant to everyone.
Absolutely. And I think this makes Richie's story and this broader TI phenomenon a really valuable case study
Yeah.
in how people grapple with these anxieties. Searching for explanations and solutions in a world that can feel increasingly chaotic and unpredictable.
It's fascinating how Richie, despite his own strong beliefs about electronic harassment, seems to be searching for that balance himself.
Yeah.
He criticizes those who exploit people's fear for profit,
Mm-hmm.
which suggests that he's trying to navigate this complex world with belief and discernment.
Right. He even makes a point of saying that, he's no saint,
Right.
but that embracing his faith is what worked for him and what he believes can help others.
Yeah.
It's a message of hope, even in the face of what he sees as a very real and terrifying threat.
So where does this leave us?
Mm.
We've explored Richie's story, delved into the concept of electronic harassment, and touched on the complexities of the TI community.
We have.
What's the takeaway for our listener? What do we want them to consider as they process all this information?
I think the key takeaway here is that the rise of these TI communities, regardless of whether the claims are true or not,
Yeah.
really speaks to some deeper anxieties of our digital age.
Right.
We're living in a world of increasing technological complexity where information spreads so rapidly.
Yeah.
And it's easy to feel a loss of control over our own lives and narratives.
Right.
It's not surprising. I think that some people might look for explanations and solutions in unconventional places, even if those explanations seem a bit far-fetched to others.
Like we're all just trying to find our own armor.
Yeah.
Our own sense of protection and agency in a world that can sometimes feel really overwhelming, whether that's through religion, technology, community, or something else entirely.
Right.
That search for meaning and security is something that we all share. Richie's story, it's almost like a reflection of this bigger struggle we all face in the digital age.
I think that's a great point, with this constant bombardment of information,
Right.
so much of it conflicting or even difficult to verify.
Right.
It's easy to get overwhelmed and to question what's real, what's not,
Yeah.
and to look for answers in some pretty unconventional places.
So is Richie's experience real
Mm.
or imagined? Or maybe a little bit of both. I mean, how do we balance empathy for people who believe they're targeted
Right.
with, healthy skepticism?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think ultimately each listener is going to have to grapple with that question on their own terms.
Right.
There's no easy answer, no definitive proof or disproof that's going to settle this debate once and for all. But I think what's important is that we engage with these questions thoughtfully,
Yeah.
that we consider multiple perspectives,
Hmm.
and that we remain open to the possibility that the truth, as always, is more nuanced than any single narrative can really capture.
Richie's story and the stories of other self-proclaimed ties, I think really serve as a reminder that line between belief and reality
Yeah,
can be blurry,
they can.
especially in an age where technology is constantly pushing those boundaries of what's possible. It's a little unsettling
It is.
and also incredibly thought-provoking.
I agree. And as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
Richie's proposed solution, embracing religion and that full armor of God.
Yeah.
It might seem a little unusual or extreme to some,
I can see that.
but I think at its core, it speaks to this really fundamental human need,
Okay.
this need for protection, for agency, for a sense of control in a world that can often feel very chaotic and unpredictable.
It makes you wonder how we as individuals, navigate the anxieties of this digital age.
It does.
How do we find our own sense of security and meaning
Right.
in a world that's constantly evolving?
Right.
Maybe exploring these stories like Richie's,
Yeah.
stories from the fringes of bluff and experience,
Mhm.
can help us better understand ourselves and the challenges we all face in this increasingly complex and interconnected world.
I think that's a good point. I
Yeah.
think sometimes the most valuable deep dives
Yeah.
are the ones that really challenge our assumptions and push us to think critically
Right.
and ultimately leave us with more questions than answers.
So to our listener, we leave you with this. What resonates with you from Richie's story?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the phenomenon of electronic harassment and the rise of TI communities? And most importantly, how do you find your own armor? How do you find your own sense of protection and agency in a world that can feel overwhelming? Keep those questions in mind as you continue your own explorations, and we will see you on our next deep dive.